You've been calling yourself weak for years, but what if the real problem isn't weakness at all? What if it's that you've never truly seen who you are? What if the version of you that you doubt every day is actually standing on top of hidden strength you've been ignoring your entire life? Most people never stop to ask a simple but dangerous question. Who told me this is who I am? From the moment you were born, definitions were placed on you before you ever had a chance to speak. You were praised for certain behaviors, corrected for others, compared, labeled, measured, and slowly shaped. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but constantly. And over time, what began as conditioning quietly transformed into what you now call your identity. You didn't choose most of the beliefs you carry about yourself. You inherited them. A comment made in childhood, a failure that embarrassed you once, a comparison that made you feel smaller, a moment where you learned that being quiet was safer than being bold, that pleasing others was better than disappointing them, that staying invisible was smarter than standing out. None of these moments were dramatic on their own, but together they built a silent script you've been following ever since. And here's the truth most people never confront. You confuse this script with who you actually are. You say, "I'm not confident," when what you really mean is, "I was trained to doubt myself." You say, "I'm not strong," when what you really mean is, "I learned early on that strength brought consequences." You say, "This is just how I am," without realizing that how you are was once a response to an environment, not a reflection of your essence. Weakness in most cases is not a trait, it's a memory. It's a learned posture. It's a strategy that once kept you safe. At some point in your life, being smaller, quieter, more agreeable, or more cautious made sense. It reduced conflict. It earned approval. It protected you from rejection, but the mind does not update its software automatically. What once protected you can now imprison you, if you never become aware of it. Notice how automatic your self-talk is. The hesitation before you speak up, the inner voice that questions your ideas before anyone else can, the reflex to downplay your abilities. These reactions feel like you, but they are not you. They are habits of thought, conditioned responses that have been rehearsed so many times they now feel natural. Familiar does not mean true. Familiar only means repeated. The most dangerous part of conditioning is not that it limits you, but that it convinces you the limits are real. You stop imagining alternatives. You stop questioning assumptions. You stop seeing yourself as someone who can change. And when change feels impossible, stagnation feels normal. That's when people begin calling themselves weak, lazy, or broken, when in reality they are simply unaware of the invisible structure shaping their choices. Think about how early you learned to fit in, how quickly you sensed what was rewarded and what was punished. Humans are meaning-making creatures, especially as children. When something hurts, the mind looks for a rule to prevent it from happening again. Don't try too hard. Don't get your hopes up. Don't trust your instincts. These rules feel wise, even protective, but they were created by a younger version of you. In a smaller world with limited information, as you grow, the world changes, but the rules remain. You carry them into adulthood, into relationships, careers, and dreams. And because these rules have been with you for so long, you defend them. You call them realism. You call them humility. You call them caution. But often, they are nothing more than outdated survival strategies. Here's the shift that changes everything. The moment you see conditioning as something you have, not something you are, awareness creates distance, and distance creates choice. When you realize that a belief was learned, you also realize it can be unlearned. When you see that a reaction was conditioned, you stop obeying it automatically. Power does not come from fighting yourself, it comes from understanding yourself. This is not about blaming parents, society, or the past. Blame keeps you trapped just as much as denial does. This is about recognizing influence without surrendering agency. You were shaped, but you are not fixed. You were conditioned, but you are not confined. The same mind that learned limitation can learn freedom, once you stop confusing familiarity with truth. Most people never escape the first layer of identity. They live their entire lives inside a story they never wrote. But the moment you question the story, even quietly, something cracks open. You begin to sense that there is more beneath the labels, more beneath the habits, more beneath the fears. And that realization is not loud or dramatic, it is subtle, unsettling, and powerful. Because once you see that weakness is learned, you can no longer pretend it is who you are. There is a quiet illusion most people live inside. Without ever noticing it, the illusion that their thoughts are facts. A thought appears in the mind, and instantly it is treated like truth, like evidence, like a verdict. I can't do this. I'm not ready. People like me don't succeed. And because these sentences sound familiar, because they repeat themselves with confidence, you assume they must be accurate. But repetition is not proof. It's conditioning in disguise. Your mind's primary job is not to make you powerful or fulfilled. Its first loyalty is to safety. It wants predictability, control, and survival. And to achieve that, it uses shortcuts, patterns learned from the past. Every time you were rejected, embarrassed, or hurt, your mind took notes. It cataloged the pain and attached meaning to it. Then it began producing thoughts designed to keep you from feeling that pain again. What you now call self-doubt was once self-protection. That's why the voice in your head doesn't sound uncertain, it sounds authoritative. It speaks in conclusions, not questions. It says, this will fail, not this might fail. It says, you're not good at this, not you haven't practiced enough. The mind frames its warnings as certainty because certainty feels safer than possibility. If it convinces you not to try, it doesn't have to deal with disappointment. But here's the trap. The mind uses the past as its evidence. Even when the future is asking something different of you, it assumes that because something happened before, it will happen again. It forgets that you've grown, learned, and changed. It ignores new information. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin living in reaction to memories instead of responding to the present moment. Notice how quickly you accept negative thoughts and how easily you question positive ones. When your mind says you're not enough, you nod. When it says you're capable, you hesitate. That imbalance didn't come from logic, it came from habit. Over time, doubt has been rehearsed more than belief, fear more than confidence. And whatever you rehearse becomes familiar. And whatever is familiar feels true. The mind is a powerful narrator but a poor judge. It tells stories based on fragments, not the whole picture. It exaggerates risks and minimizes your strengths. It remembers your failures in high definition and your successes in vague outlines. And because you're listening from inside the story, you forget that a story is still a story, not reality itself. The real issue is not that you have limiting thoughts. Everyone does. The issue is that you identify with them. You say, I am anxious, instead of, anxious thoughts are present. You say, I am weak, instead of, my mind is expressing fear. That small difference in language changes everything. One makes the thought your identity. The other makes it an experience, temporary, movable, and questionable. Awareness creates a pause. And in that pause, you gain power. The moment you notice a thought instead of obeying it, you break the spell. You don't need to fight the thought or replace it with something positive. Fighting gives it importance. You simply observe it and ask quietly but firmly, is this absolutely true? Most of the time, the thought collapses under its own weight. Because it was never built on truth, only on fear. Your mind will resist this at first. It will argue. It will bring up past evidence. It will say, be realistic. But realism without awareness is just recycled fear. True realism includes the present version of you, not the outdated one your mind keeps referencing. It includes your resilience, your adaptability, your ability to learn. It includes the fact that you have survived everything you once thought would break you. Think about how many times your worst fears didn't come true. How many times you adapted when things didn't go as planned. How many times you handled situations you once thought you couldn't. None of that is stored in the mind as strongly as fear, because fear speaks louder, but silence doesn't mean absence. Your strength has been quiet, not non-existent. The moment you stop taking every thought personally, you create space to choose differently. You begin acting based on intention rather than impulse. You start responding to life instead of reacting to imagined threats. And slowly, the voice that once controlled you loses its authority. Not because it disappeared, but because you no longer mistake it for truth. This is where real strength begins. Not in silencing the mind, but in seeing through it. When you realize that your thoughts are not commands, not prophecies, not definitions of who you are, something shifts. You stop waiting to feel confident before acting. You act and confidence follows. You stop waiting for fear to disappear. You move forward with fear present. And in that moment, you understand something fundamental. You were never weak. You were just listening without awareness. Most people believe their limits are personal, that their hesitation is a flaw, that their lack of confidence is something they were born with. But what if I told you that much of what you call who you are was never chosen by you at all? It was absorbed, collected quietly, repeated so often it started to feel like truth. From childhood, before you had language to question, you were learning rules about yourself and the world. What is acceptable? What is risky? What people like you can or cannot do? And the mind didn't filter these lessons, it recorded them. Every environment conditions you. Family, school, culture, religion, society. None of them are neutral. They reward certain behaviors and punish others. Speak up too much, you're told to be quiet. Ask too many questions, you're called difficult. Make a mistake, you're labeled careless. Slowly, you begin editing yourself. Not consciously, but instinctively. You learn when to shrink, when to hide, when to stay safe. And years later, you mistake that shrinking for your personality. You say, "I'm just not confident," without realizing that confidence was discouraged. You say, "I overthink everything," without seeing that you were trained to anticipate consequences to avoid blame. You say, "I don't take risks," without remembering how risk once led to shame or loss. None of this makes you weak. It makes you conditioned. The mind builds its identity from repetition. Whatever message is repeated enough times becomes internal law, even if it was never spoken directly. Sometimes it was a look, a comparison, a silence. You watched who was praised and who was ignored. You learned what brought approval and what brought distance. And the mind, always trying to keep you connected and safe, adjusted your behavior accordingly. The danger is not conditioning itself. Conditioning is inevitable. The danger is unconscious conditioning. When you don't realize where a belief came from, you assume it came from truth. You assume it reflects your ability, your nature, your destiny. But many of your strongest self-beliefs are simply borrowed, conclusions that were never re-examined. Ask yourself this: how many of your limits were consciously chosen? How many times did you sit down and decide, rationally, this is the full extent of my potential? You didn't. The limits arrived quietly. They settled in through experience. And because they arrived early, they feel permanent. The mind loves consistency. Once it forms an identity, it tries to protect it. Even if that identity is small, even if it hurts you. If you've seen yourself as the quiet one, the mind will generate fear every time you're about to speak up. If you've seen yourself as not creative, the mind will dismiss ideas before you explore them. It's not trying to sabotage you. It's trying to keep the story intact. But here's the truth that changes everything. An identity built through conditioning is not the same as your true capacity. It's a survival strategy, not a final form. It was shaped by past environments that may no longer exist. The rules have changed, but the mind is still playing by old instructions. That's why growth feels uncomfortable. You're not just learning something new. You're violating an internal agreement. You're stepping outside a role you've been playing for years. And the discomfort you feel is not proof you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're doing something unfamiliar. Notice how the body reacts when you challenge an old identity. The tension, the hesitation, the urge to retreat. That's conditioning surfacing. That's the mind saying, this is not who we are. But that voice is outdated. It's referencing a version of you that no longer fully exists. Awareness is what loosens conditioning, not force, not positive thinking. Awareness, the moment you see a pattern as learned, rather than innate, it loses its grip. You stop saying, this is me, and start saying, this was taught to me. And what is taught can be questioned. What is learned can be unlearned. You don't need to erase your past. You don't need to blame anyone. Conditioning isn't about fault, it's about recognition. Once you recognize the source, you regain choice. You can keep what serves you and release what doesn't. You can honor the protection it once gave you without letting it control your future. This is where real power begins to return, not in becoming someone new, but in reclaiming parts of yourself that were never allowed to develop. The courage that was discouraged, the curiosity that was silenced, the confidence that was postponed. They didn't disappear. They went dormant. And the moment you stop confusing conditioning with destiny, something shifts inside you. You stand a little straighter. You stand a little straighter. You question the old rules. You try things without needing permission, because you finally see the truth. You were never weak. You were trained to forget how strong you are. There comes a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable. When something inside you starts to question the story you've been living in. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a small doubt that whispers, "What if this isn't the whole truth?" That moment is powerful because awareness doesn't arrive like motivation. It arrives like clarity. And clarity is dangerous to every limitation you've been carrying unconsciously. Most people think change begins with action, but action is never first. Awareness is. Before you can move differently, you must see differently. And for most of your life, you've been seeing yourself through a distorted lens, one shaped by fear, habit, and repetition. You didn't choose that lens, but you've been using it every day. Awareness begins when you catch yourself in a pattern. The way you hesitate before speaking, the way you downplay your achievements, the way you assume rejection before it happens. At first, you think, "That's just how I am." But then awareness steps in and asks, "Is it?" That single question creates space. And in that space, old beliefs begin to loosen. The mind operates on autopilot more than you realize. Most of your reactions are not decisions. They are reflexes, learned responses triggered by familiar situations. Someone challenges you, you shut down. An opportunity appears, you delay. Praise comes, you deflect. None of this is accidental. It's the mind repeating what once kept you safe. But awareness interrupts the loop. When you notice the reaction instead of immediately obeying it, you create a pause. And in that pause, for the first time, you have choice. You don't have to act differently yet. Just seeing the pattern is enough to weaken it, because what remains unconscious controls you. What becomes conscious begins to answer to you. This is why awareness feels uncomfortable. You're not just observing habits, you're watching the structure of your identity shake. The version of you that was built on fear, approval, and limitation starts to feel unstable, and the mind resists this instability. It would rather keep you small and familiar than uncertain and free. You may notice resistance showing up as excuses. "This isn't the right time. That's not realistic. People like me don't do that." These thoughts sound logical, but they are emotional defenses wearing intellectual clothing. Awareness lets you see them for what they are, not truth, but protection mechanisms. Once you become aware, you can no longer unknow. You start noticing how often fear disguises itself as practicality, how often self-doubt pretends to be humility, how often comfort pretends to be wisdom. And this seeing changes you, even before you change anything else. You begin to realize that power isn't something you gain, it's something you stop giving away unconsciously. Every time you assume you can't, every time you stay silent to stay safe, every time you shrink to avoid judgment, you hand your power to an old story. Awareness helps you catch that moment and reclaim it. This doesn't mean you suddenly become fearless. Awareness doesn't erase fear, it exposes it. And when fear is exposed, it loses its authority. You stop asking fear for permission. You stop treating it like a command. You see it as information, not instruction. Something subtle but profound happens here. You start responding instead of reacting. You choose instead of defaulting. You realize that confidence isn't loudness, it's self-trust. And self-trust grows every time you notice a fear and move consciously anyway. Awareness also shows you how much energy you've been spending fighting yourself. How many internal arguments? How much self-judgment? When you see this, compassion naturally arises, not weakness, but understanding. You stop hating yourself for patterns that were learned, not chosen, and that compassion frees up energy you didn't know you had. With awareness, growth stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like alignment. You're no longer trying to become someone else. You're simply removing the blindfold. You're seeing your thoughts as events, not facts. You're seeing your emotions as signals, not identities. And slowly your inner posture changes. You don't rush. You don't force. You observe. You adjust. You move with intention. That's real strength, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The most powerful people are not the most aggressive or the most confident looking. They are the most aware. They know when fear is speaking. They know when conditioning is trying to take control. And because they know, they are not ruled by it. This is the turning point. Awareness doesn't just show you the cage, it shows you that the door was never locked. And once you see that, you can never fully believe in your own weakness again. At some point, awareness turns inward in a deeper way. You don't just notice your fear or hesitation. You start noticing the voice behind it, the constant commentary in your head, the quiet judgments, the subtle comparisons, the running narration that tells you who you are, what you can handle, and where you belong. For most people, that voice has been there so long that they mistake it for truth. But that voice is not you. It's conditioning. It's a collection of borrowed opinions, past experiences, failures magnified, and successes minimized. And the moment you recognize that separation between the observer and the voice, you reclaim something powerful. You realize you are the one listening, not the one being spoken. This is where inner strength truly begins, not in forcing positive thoughts, but in questioning negative ones. You start asking, who said this? When did I learn this? Is this fact or is this habit? And many times the answer surprises you. The belief was never proven. It was repeated, reinforced, accepted without examination. Once you see that, the voice loses its grip. It may still speak, but it no longer commands. Doubt shows up, but you don't bow to it. Fear speaks, but you don't obey automatically. You let it exist without letting it decide. That alone changes everything. You also begin to understand that self-respect is not loud confidence. It's the quiet refusal to keep betraying yourself. It's honoring your own perceptions. It's acting in alignment even when the old voice says, stay small. Every time you do that, something shifts inside. Not dramatically, but steadily. You stop waiting to feel ready. You stop waiting to feel fearless. You move with awareness, not approval. And slowly, the inner noise fades. Not because it's gone, but because it's no longer in control. That's when you realize the strongest version of you was never missing, only muted. As awareness grows, something else becomes clear. Your strength has always shown up in quiet ways, but you were taught to overlook it. You were taught to measure power by loud wins, visible confidence, or constant certainty. So you dismissed endurance, you dismissed patience, you dismissed the fact that you survived moments that should have broken you. That wasn't weakness, that was power operating without applause. Think about how many times you kept going while doubting yourself. How many days you showed up carrying fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, and still moved forward. That ability to continue despite inner resistance is not accidental. It's a form of resilience most people never learn to recognize in themselves. And when you finally acknowledge it, something inside you straightens. This is the moment where self-trust begins to rebuild. Not trust in perfection, but trust in recovery. Trust that even if you stumble, you won't abandon yourself. Trust that you can face discomfort without collapsing. Once that trust forms, fear loses its authority. It no longer controls your decisions, it simply informs them. You also stop seeking constant validation from the outside. You no longer need permission to take yourself seriously. You start acting from an internal reference point, instead of waiting for reassurance. And the strange thing is, when you do that, others begin to respond differently. Not because you demanded respect, but because you started giving it to yourself. Strength at this stage feels grounded, calm, unshakable in a quiet way. You don't rush to prove anything. You don't need to convince the world. You move with intention, and that intention carries weight. That's when you realize you were never fragile. You were just unaware of how solid you already are. You were never broken, never powerless, only unaware. And the moment you see your true strength, everything begins to shift.